The other guy you mentioned, and actually we mentioned both of these guys, and they are currently teammates. Zay Flowers with his 63.63, Rashad Bateman with a 66.79, coming in higher than Zay Flowers. But I would say so far the early returns on Zay are much more positive than they were on Rashad Bateman. And I think Zay is a really good case of using the rest of your process and incorporating that around the
Yeah.
score, right? Because yeah, he's under that 65. But take a look at the landing spot that he had. They did not have anybody who does what Zay Flowers does. You know what I mean? He can
Yep.
stretch the field from the slot. He can work crossers from the slot. He can catch shallow passes and take them to the house after the catch. Like, he provided something that this team didn't have, and it was very apparent. So I like everything that I've seen from Zay Flowers so far. I still like Rashad Bateman. And actually, it's funny, another guy that falls in this range is Tyler Johnson.
Yeah.
Love both of those guys. Tyler Johnson was like a heartthrob of the True North Fantasy Football podcast, but never panned out. I still think he could have been sick. And I still think
Yeah.
Rashad Bateman with some opportunity could be good as well. But we have to go with the probabilities. And what we know in Dynasty is that when you get that deep into your career, as is Rashad Bateman,
Yeah.
and your best hope is to change teams and then break out, probably should not bet on that happening. But for Zay, it was really encouraging to see the downfield work, because early in the season, it kind of looked like he was getting pigeonholed into that lower average depth of target. Has to
Yeah.
be done via yak from the slot stuff. As the season progressed, though, we started to see more deep shots, and I loved it. So what's your stance on Zay Flowers? And maybe sprinkle maybe a little bit of hope or not for Rashad Bateman after, if you got any.
No, I think the point about Zay that's really interesting and I think is really important to talk about is the fact that we did have some worries about him being pigeonholed into a certain role kind of early on, right? There was a ton of designed targets or design touches with him in the beginning that were, really close to the line of scrimmage, right? And, how sustainable is something like that? But then when you look back at the second half of the season, how he did start to, let's not even necessarily expand his route tree, but just get that increased downfield utilization. And then to see that, look, I know he had a big time fumble at the goal line in the playoffs, but to see him make that catch down the field in the playoffs when, kind of the chips are down, right? Like that's really, really encouraging. And I think one thing that I go back to where for this group, right, is something that you've kind of mentioned twice now, Trav, and I didn't touch on it before, and I really should have, is that this group is really important to understand landing spot, right? Like, because that's where I think that in addition to rounding out your process with film on the other side of this, I think really understanding what they're going into from a landing spot perspective and potential for ceiling and potential for role and utilization, everything like that is really, really massive, right? Because to your point, Zay is a perfect example that, look, while he's still in that like 70th percentile or, like 65th percentile within the score,
Yeah.
within the model score, which obviously is not bad, but it's nothing where it's wowing you or anything like that. He was a first round draft pick going into a decent situation, right? So I think it's a really good point about understanding landing spot. And that's where it goes back to doing your homework on the NFL side too, like taking back and looking at recent offensive coordinator changes, with like somebody last year, like Todd Monken coming in, like it wasn't your old Ravens offense anymore that you saw with Greg Roman. So understanding certain things like that are really, really important when it comes to rounding out the model and using it correctly. So great point there, Trav. The other one, man, I still want to say that like I haven't shut the light off for him yet. Like it's dimmed.
Same.
Like
Thank you.
if this was like the 1700s, right? And there was like a candle, like an oil candle, it was very bright a little while ago. And now I'm just like, I'm slowly turning it down, but like
Yeah.
I refuse to blow it
Yep.
out.
Yep.
And
Can't
right now
stop
it's
the
just
candle.
really, yeah, it's just really low right now. But like
Yeah.
every once in a while, I want to turn it up because I see like recently, Jim Harbaugh made some comments that, Rashad Bateman's going to be a big part of the offense next year. Right. Like I think
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah.
That was right before the combine.
Sure, bud.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. Appreciate that. But then also at the same time, in conjunction with that, I'm seeing, a couple Twitter videos that are like 2 and 3 minute compilations of him running routes in 2023,
Baller.
generating yards of separation on like multiple different routes. And
Yeah.
it's like, don't do this to me right now. Like I can't, like the roller coaster that is Rashad Bateman. I think it's somebody that, again, he wasn't as high for us as he was for some people. I know that there were some people kind of going back to, after looking back and kind of going through some previous ADPs for some of these wide receivers in previous rookie drafts, I know he was quite high up there for a lot of people. And I understand why. Like the guy flashes, like some of his film is really fantastic, and from a production standpoint, and then when you think about the draft capital, right? But again, he's kind of in that Jahan Dotson zone to me, where it's like, look, if he's cheap enough to go buy or as a sweetener throw in, like I'm not saying go out and spend like real assets or real draft capital to go out and get somebody like a Dotson or a Bateman or anything like that. But what I am saying is like look, you could do worse taking a flyer on somebody if you want to take a flyer, right? So uh, he is somebody that like, look, if the price is cheap enough, yeah, sure, I'll take a chance on him for one more time, right? So that's kind of how I'm
Totally.
looking at Rashad Bateman right now.
For sure, man. And I think kind of to your point, like there's different levels of flyer that you're taking, right? I think the
Yes.
potential breakout from Jahan Dotson is way bigger than the potential breakout from Rashad Bateman because we're fairly confident that with Lamar Jackson, that's going to stay uh, maybe not a super run heavy team because they improved on that this season with Todd Munkin, but they're not going to flip the needle all the way to being just a pass
No.
happy team because of that offense, right? Rashad Bateman is going to be that's going to be to his detriment a little bit. You know what I mean? And so maybe if there's still any wick left, he can find a new candlestick, and that candle that's beside him can share its flame, and he can start burning bright once again. So